GD 102 Design Principles with Duncan Heather. Just as the bubble diagrams help provide functional and spatial organisation, the design principles aid in establishing the visual and aesthetic organisation of the site. There are three main design principles. These are continuity, unity, and rhythm. Continuity can be described as the essence of the underlying framework of the design. It's present in both bubble diagrams and the sketch plan stage of the design process. And it's created by establishing a coordinated composition of forms and materials. Form composition establishes a theme or style that in turn establishes a strong sense of continuity. Within the context of the design, there are two additional ways continuity can be created, and those are symmetry and asymmetry. Symmetry and asymmetry both create an overall feeling of balance. Balance is the perception that various parts of the design are in equilibrium, and it can be achieved by the careful distribution of shapes, masses, and accents over an area without necessarily spacing them equally each side of an axis. Many historical gardens were laid out symmetrically to demonstrate man's ability to manipulate nature. Symmetry still has its place in modern design today, especially as an axis of a symmetrical layout has the ability to focus a view. Continuity is the effective tying together of all of the elements of the design. It can be achieved in several different ways. The use of similar materials throughout the design, for example, similar plant forms, such as iris, phormium, or rounded pea shingle and cobbles. The use of the same materials, for instance bold groups of the same plant, or matching paving. In the photograph you can see an example of mirror planting, where instead of the designer having to design two sides of a border, they have mirrored the planting, so reflecting the same plants on each side of the path. Unity is the harmonious relationship among elements of the design and can be broken down into two main types and then again into subtypes. The first is natural unity, used primarily in large country gardens, whereas introduced unity tends to be more urban or city spaces. Both can be broken down to the subtypes of inward and outward looking. Natural unity. This occurs as a result of continuity or repetition. For example, geological unity or natural stone type. Another being plant unity, which occurs as a result of continuity. An example of this would be climatic influenced plant species. Attempting to alter natural unity will often be expensive and unsatisfactory. The garden designer has much more influence over introduced unity. Inward-looking unity is when the design unifies from within its own boundaries. It pays no attention to any external influences and is more of a stage set, taking its influences from the internal decoration or the client's personality. This is most common with estate-type houses or subdivisions. Outward-looking unity is when the landscape is deliberately blended to merge with the garden, and what is known as borrowed landscape within the industry. Unity of basic shape. The layout or ground pattern can give the impression of unity if similar patterns have been used. In the example here, we have a dominant square or rectangular theme. Repetition is the principle of utilizing similar elements throughout the design. Repetition can be utilized in several different ways. Materials and elements should be minimized in any given area to perhaps 1 or 2 paving materials only, while planting material should also be minimized. Having minimized the materials, the next step is to repeat them throughout the design so the onlooker can connect areas within the site. Accents are created in a design by making one element or group more prominent in comparison to another element. Without accents, the eye tends to wander. When a focal point is introduced, it acts as a magnet, drawing attention to the area. In the slide on the right, it's the seating area that gives us our focal point in this small courtyard garden. In small gardens, the house will dominate the plot. But just as a photo needs a point of interest, so does a garden. In larger gardens, focal points can act as elements of surprise or reward as the onlooker travels round the garden. Items such as seating and sculpture can act as rewards and help encourage the onlooker walk round the site. While continuity and unity deal with the composition of the design, rhythm deals with time and movement. We have looked at unity, but if the designs are to be interesting, we must also introduce contrast in equilibrium with unity. Elements have greater visual strength if contrast exists. Disciplined contrast is complementary to a unified design, but paradoxically, unrestricted contrast between elements will lead to disorder and competition. Contrast is achieved by one or more of the following characteristics: a contrast in texture, a contrast in form, a contrast in colour, and finally a contrast in height.